It's time for the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity review for the Nintendo Switch. When this game was first announced, I was really excited to play it as I enjoyed the first Hyrule Warriors back on the Wii U. However, when it did release, it got thrown on the back burner of games I wanted to play, and it wasn't until a couple weeks before this video that I finally got around to play it. Should I have not waited so long? Let's find out. The story takes place in the Breath of the Wild universe, specifically shortly before the events of Calamity Ganon Awakening. Now, let me first say that I didn't research anything about this game from the time it released until I played it, and because of that, I was a bit shocked to find out that this game is non-canon to the Breath of the Wild timeline, even though it's easy to assume it is. As you play through, you'll notice certain events and story scenarios that conflict with the main Breath of the Wild story. I kept waiting for specific story elements to take place as I played through, but they never happened, and the ones that came up conflicted with Breath of the Wild's story. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you haven't played it yet, just know you'll basically have to have the perception that, at best, this is a game in a different Zelda timeline, official or not, altogether. Whew. Now, with all that said, the only details I'll say about the story is that you start out as Link and a young Impa, and you accompany Zelda with a unique small guardian companion as she traverses Hyrule hoping to unlock her sealing power. Just like Hyrule Warriors on Wii U, Age of Calamity is actually a Dynasty Warriors game with a Zelda coat of paint. The way you move around and combat enemies is not like a typical Zelda game. Each area that you play in has various objectives to complete, such as capturing strongholds from the enemy to taking out a final boss of the area. Unlike Breath of the Wild, you're not free to roam anywhere and instead are restricted to linear paths. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but each area looks to be the exact map of Breath of the Wild, just at a somewhat lower resolution. Also, since each area takes place before the Calamity, many structures not previously seen are present, such as buildings, statues, and fences. This is especially apparent in Castletown. As you play through, you'll meet different characters that will join your team. Each one has their own unique fighting combinations, and it's fun to try everyone out. While the base combat controls are the same for every character, X for weak attacks and Y for strong, some have variations that change up the gameplay a bit. And even though each character has the same combination input between X and Y, their attacks are different enough to allow players to choose which characters they like to play as the most. For me, Link and Mipha are my mains, but you might find different characters, and perhaps characters that you might not expect to be a main fighting character, suit your playstyle better. There are two sets of enemies, regular and unique. Regular enemies appear in hordes and are quite easy to take down. Unique enemies are stronger and usually only appear as one in an objective scenario. Unlike regular enemies, it'll take a long time to defeat them if you just hack and slash away, so instead, you need to first break their weak point gauge in order to inflict a large chunk of damage. An enemy's weak point gauge will be exposed in various ways, such as after the enemy performs a heavy attack, or if your character completes a certain action on the enemy, such as performing a quick dodge or countering the enemy with the right attack. The combat of this game actually makes me wish Breath of the Wild's combat system was similar, as it's so much fun to just rip your way through with devastating combos. After you complete a level, you'll be rewarded with rupees and experience for every character who battled. Even if you never switch to a different character during the mission, they'll still receive some experience. I like this, and the fact that the game doesn't force you to change characters in your party. It's not really designed for the player to only stick with one character on each mission, but you're not penalized if you choose to only play as one character. The computer-controlled characters actually help out some by inflicting real damage, and they'll also head towards the next objective on their own. You can give them orders on where to go, which is a nice touch, and this can be especially helpful if the level you're on has a time limit. When a level is completed, various side objectives and side quests will be unlocked on the map, many of which aren't combative, but require you to collect specific amounts of different items to complete the quest. While not mandatory, the game will become much more negatively challenging if you ignore these. Plus, collecting items isn't difficult as it's a main element of each level, like after you take down a horde of bokoblins, you'll be rewarded with various monster parts. The only thing that threw me off was the amount of drop monster parts I received. Since this game is taking established Zelda assets from a real Zelda game, I couldn't help but feel like I should have received item drops much more frequently than I did. Namely, I expected monster parts from every monster I defeated. However, this isn't the case, and you only receive drops after you defeated a group of enemies. Like these keys here. My mind automatically thinks I'll receive many key swings and or eyeballs after defeating them, but no, I only receive one eyeball drop. Now, this isn't anything against the game, but at the same time, it just feels weird to only net a fraction of drops in this game compared to the actual Zelda game it's based on. As I mentioned, the graphics seem to be a step down in resolution to its source material, but not to the point that it's ugly or anything, and it's expected due to the amount of graphical assets eating up the viewing area, especially when there are tons of enemies around. However, because of this, the frame rate dropped more than a handful of times, which is unfortunate. The controls are simple, but it can take a bit to get used to when you're trying to memorize attack combinations with every character. Link's moveset is pretty easy to remember, but since he can also use two-handed weapons and spears, he technically has 3 sets of attack combinations that can take some time to memorize. Honestly, the control scheme that threw me off the most was remembering to hold down R to use the Sheikah Slates runes, and L to use elemental wand attacks. For some reason, I kept reversing the buttons, and even to the very end of the game did I not 100% remember which one was which, and the point is I wish I could have reversed the map function of L and R. Everything else, though, worked just fine. One game element I enjoyed were the handful of levels where you got to control the divine beasts and use their raw power to destroy thousands of enemies. These levels felt like a bonus and broke up the potential monotony of the main game. By default, the motion controls are on for aiming purposes, but it can conflict with the analog stick controls, so I found turning them off was for the better. The boss fights were a mixed bag. Most of the enemies were fun to fight, but how you defeated them wasn't much different than fighting like normal. I don't know if I'm being too picky, but I wish there had been more to the boss fights than what we got. I will say, the final boss was actually really fun, and I wish Breath of the Wild's final boss fight was like this game's. Age of Calamity is quite a long game, more than I initially thought, and I didn't even come close to finishing everything on the map. While there's much to do, I found that many of the side missions started to feel like chores, and I began to feel disinterested. And actually, that feeling started to apply with the main campaign. Don't get me wrong, it's overall fun, but it started to feel monotonous, and I couldn't help but feel like I just wanted to beat it just so I could be done with it. Fortunately, co-op mode can reinvigorate your passion for taking out hundreds of baddies, and the levels can go by quicker, in a good sense, when you work together. Hooray for teamwork! Even though I had fun with this game, I can't help but feel like I enjoyed the original Wii U Hyrule Warriors better. This may sound very nitpicky, but the fact that the game takes source material from a real Zelda game and plays out like it's canon, but it's not, really throws me off. Overall though, there are many positives that outweigh the negative, and playing co-op with a friend can make the experience even better. If you enjoyed the original Hyrule Warriors, you should like this one too. This game gets 4.25 out of 5 with the title of Awesome.